Welcome to Starbound. My name's the Voice Ogre, and I'll be your narrator today. Nearly 500 supporters get early access to our stories, including brand new stories of Sunspire Academy, which I happen to do, and Freyren and Rimiki. If you'd like to unlock early access and support new episodes and future series, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. Brock's hand didn't waver, the borrowed chef's knife gleaming dully in the intermittent red pulse of the emergency lights. It felt alien in his grip, heavier than his familiar firearms, intimate in a way Trigger wasn't. His gaze bored into Bjorngir, searching the massive gourd's dark eyes for any flicker of deception. The air in the locker room was thick with the metallic tang of fear and the heavy silence left by the departed pirates. Bjorngir. Brock's voice was low, tight, barely more than a whisper, but carrying the weight of accusation. What did you do? Bjorngir didn't flinch. He remained bound to the G-ball bench, but his posture, even restrained, radiated a defiant tension. The black spines along his head and down his back bristled, a clear sign of agitation Brock had learned to read during their G-ball encounters. What choice did I have, human? Bjorngir's voice was a low rumble, rough with emotion Brock hadn't heard from him before. Not just aggression, but something closer to anguish. You heard Kurfix, my mother, the Oracle. Mother? That's the oldest excuse. But something in Bjorngir's tone, the raw edge beneath the typical gourd gruffness, made him hesitate. Explain, Brock said curtly. Bjorngir's eyes darted toward the door, then back to Brock. It came just before the attack. A coded transmission, untraceable, and it slipped through the academy, security like smoke. It showed her. His voice hitched almost imperceptibly. My mother, still alive. Held somewhere. By those pirates, Kurfix's fanatics. The message was simple. Plant the device they called the Wild Seed at the coordinates provided, near the QCOM array, without alerting anyone. Or she would die, slowly, horribly. He strained against the restraints. Kurfix spoke of bloodlines, of purging weakness. I thought it was just leverage. A way to ensure my silence. I didn't know. His voice dropped, thick with fury. I didn't know that he had planned this. Burning the spire, killing the team. Calling gourds like Feckerton's soft scales. He used my mother's life, used me, spat on our bloodline while claiming to uphold it. Brock watched him, processing. The story was almost too convenient, yet the fury felt real. Bjorngir, the proud son of a G-Ball legend, admitting coercion? Admitting fear for his mother? It warred with the image of the aggressive rival Brock knew. But the sheer desperation in Bjorngir's eyes, the way his scales seemed pale even under the red light, it felt genuine. Could I condemn him? If it were my fault? No, that's a bad example. Still, the thought was unsettling. Why didn't you tell Feckerton? Brock pressed, needing more. Or the Dean. The message was explicit. Bjorngir grated out. Any deviation, any warning given, any hint of compromise, and she dies immediately. How could I risk it, human? How could I gamble her life on the hope that Kurfix was bluffing? These fanatics, they do not bluff about death. He looked down at his bonds. I planted it, put it where they said. Thought I bought her safety. And then the Kurfix came here. Spoke of purging the weakness from the team. Spoke of leveling the spire. I realized then that I was a fool. A pawn. His head snapped up, eyes blazing.
But I am not Kurfix's pawn now.
He lowered his voice urgently.
We don't have long. The patrol is due any minute.
Brock's mind raced. Bjorngeir's story, true or not, changed things. He glanced at the schematic navigator Dean Oubliette had given him. The intricate map pulsing faintly in his hand, casting shifting blue light on their faces. He quickly scanned the area around the locker room. Maintenance access, environmental controls. An idea sparked. Just then, the distinct, heavy rhythm of approaching bootsteps echoed down the corridor outside. Metallic clangs against the floor. Getting closer. Fast.
They're here, Brock hissed. Get ready.
Brock lunged towards a damaged panel on the wall near the showers, indicated on the schematic as an access point for local environmental systems. Ripping it open revealed a tangle of conduits and a simple control interface. He didn't know the exact commands, but context suggested options. Coolant flush? Emergency lighting? He slammed his palm onto a large red button labeled System Purge, Coolant Cycle, and hoped for the best. With a pneumatic hiss and a sudden roar, icy coolant mist erupted from the vents near the locker room entrance, thick and white, instantly obscuring visibility. Simultaneously, a ceiling-mounted strobe light kicked on, blasting the entryway with disorienting high-frequency flashes of harsh white light. The heavy locker room door slammed open, and two gored pirates barged in, weapons raised. They were younger than Kurfix's main guards, clad in the same charcoal and dark red weldtree armor, but they were momentarily thrown off balance, recoiling instinctively from the sudden cold blast and blinding light, shouting in surprise and confusion. In that split second of disorientation, he darted forward, the chef's knife slicing cleanly through the thick restraints binding Bjorngeir's wrists and ankles. "Now!" Brock yelled. Freed, Bjorngeir didn't hesitate. A guttural roar of pure, unadulterated fury ripped from his throat as he surged upwards off the bench. He wasn't just escaping. He was unleashing weeks of suppressed pride, fear, and the boiling rage of betrayal. He ignored the discarded restraints, ignored the stinging cold, and charged directly at the nearest disoriented guard. The guard, still blinking coolant from his eyes, tried to bring his rifle up. But Bjorngeir was too fast, too close. The massive gourd slammed into him like a loaded freight train, using his sheer bulk to drive the pirate back against the lockers with a deafening crash. Bjorngeir knew gourd physiology, knew their armor's weak points. He drove his fist into the guard's visor seam, shattering the transparasteel, then followed with a brutal blow to the exposed neck joint. The guard went limp. The second pirate recovered faster, swinging his rifle towards Brock. Brock dove low, rolling behind a row of lockers as energy bolts scorched the air where he had been. He glimpsed the red medkit mounted nearby. Could be useful, and yanked it free in one fluid motion as he prepared to move again, just as Bjorngeir pivoted, grabbing a heavy Durasteel G-ball practice weight from a nearby rack. With another roar, he swung it like a club, catching the second pirate square in the chest plate. The armor held, but the impact sent the pirate stumbling back, gasping for air. Brock saw his opening. He darted out from behind the lockers, closing the distance while the pirate staggered. He feinted high, then dropped low, plunging the sharp tip of the chef's knife into the vulnerable gap where the thigh armor met the hip joint, twisting hard. The pirate screamed, dropping his rifle and clawing at the wound as Bjorngeir finished him with a final, crushing blow to his helmet. The fight was over in less than 20 seconds. Brutal, efficient, desperate. The strobe light flickered off, leaving only the pulsing red emergency lights. The coolant mist hissed, slowly dissipating, revealing the two crumpled forms of the Weldtree pirates amidst the scattered locker room equipment. Bjorngeir stood, heaving, chest rising and falling rapidly. The practice weight still gripped tight in his fist. His face was a mask of grim resolve, his earlier conflict seemingly burned away by the violence. He looked back at the fallen pirates, then at Brock.
They would have killed the team,
he said, his voice raspy. Brock nodded, catching his own breath, the adrenaline making his hands tremble slightly. He forced them steady. He checked the schematic again, the navigator confirming what his ears already told him. More heavy footfalls echoing from further down the corridor. Alerted by the sounds of the fight. More coming. It's now or never. We gotta move. He pointed towards a low-maintenance hatch near the floor, almost hidden behind a rack of G-ball pads. This way. Climbing into the maintenance vents felt like entering the guts of some ancient metal beast. The space was tight, barely wide enough for Brock, let alone Bjorngeir's massive frame. Darkness pressed in, broken only by the glow of the schematic navigator Brock held aloft in the small drone fleet directed ahead. The air was stale, thick with the smell of dust and old machinery oil. Every movement echoed, the scrape of Bjorngeir's armor against the metal walls, the scuff of Brock's boots, the whirring of the drone. Brock led the way, his eyes glued to the holographic pathways twisting and turning ahead of him. The schematic was their only guide through this lightless labyrinth. He had to duck under low pipes, squeeze past humming junction boxes, and navigate sharp turns. Left here, Brock whispered, his voice sounding loud in the confined space. Careful, sharp turn, low clearance. Behind him, Bjorngeir grunted, the sound of his armor scraping echoing Brock's words. How far to the rendezvous? Another 50 feet, maybe? A straight section coming up, then a vertical ladder down. Brock kept his voice even, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. The responsibility of the schematic, of leading them through this death trap, weighed heavily. One wrong turn could lead them into a dead end, or worse, right into a pirate patrol. They moved in tense silence for a few minutes, the only sounds their breathing and the faint, distant thrum of the wounded spire around them. Brock raised a glance back. Bjorngeir's eyes glinted in the low light, his expression unreadable but focused. You okay? Brock asked, keeping his voice low, hearing the heavy scrape of Bjorngeir's armor echoing just behind him. A pause followed, filled only with the sound of shifting metal against the vent walls. Then a gruff rumble came from behind him.
This passage favors your size, human. I manage. Just lead.
Finally, a schematic showed their destination, a T-junction where their vent met a larger service corridor. Brock slowed, signaling for Bjorngeir to halt. He carefully pushed open the vent cover. They emerged into a wide, dusty service corridor. Unlike the cramped vents, this space felt cavernous, though still dimly lit by sparse emergency lighting strips overhead. Pipes and conduits lined the walls, casting long, distorted shadows. And waiting there, near the junction, were Fleek and Lariel. Fleek looked up from the scavenged tech device he was tinkering with, his ears perking slightly. His thick-rimmed glasses caught the faint light.
You've returned. Your vital signs are elevated, but stable,
he reported, his voice calm and analytical as ever.
Minimal external injuries detected on both subjects. Very good.
Lariel, however, was anything but analytical. She pushed herself off the grimy wall she'd been leaning against, her sapphire skin seeming to absorb the dim light. Her arms were crossed, and her striking orange hair seemed to blaze even in the gloom. Her gaze fixed on Bjorngeir with undisguised suspicion, her melodious voice dripping with ice.
Well,
she said, ignoring Brock entirely.
Look what the human has dragged in. So, the traitor decides to switch sides when it suits him.
Bjorngeir's spine ridges stiffened, but he didn't rise to the bait directly. His attention was locked on Brock and Fleek, his voice urgent, still rough from the earlier exertion.
Corfax lies. He threatened my mother. He dishonors true gods. My reasons are my own.
He gestured sharply towards the schematic in Brock's hand.
The whaled seat. It requires physical access to disable it properly. Corfax needs the human alive, yes, but he intends to cripple the spire beyond repair. Prove God's strength by shattering Orient pride, he calls it. His followers are fanatics, and they believe every word.
He paused, taking a breath, his eyes hardening.
There is more. I was restrained. I overheard Grolnak, one of Kurfix's commanders. They were specifically hunting Coach Fekkerden. Brock frowned. Fekkerden? Why? They mentioned codes. Bjorngir confirmed. Biometrics. Access to primary systems. Grolnak seemed convinced Fekkerden held keys to something critical. Fleek immediately chimed in, looking up from his device. Primary systems could encompass numerous critical functions. Power distribution networks, environmental controls, shield modulation matrices, internal defense grids. Access would be catastrophic. Brock quickly manipulated the schematic, searching for Fekkerden's unique identifier. Faculty members had them, linked to their emergency beacons. The small, flashing dot appeared. I found him, floor 78, near Power Junction Gamma 7. He zoomed in. The display showed a dense cluster of red dots, pirates, surrounding Fekkerden's location. God damn it. Heavy concentration. The immediate priority shifted in an instant. The Q-com array was still the ultimate goal, but Fekkerden might hold the key to stopping the pirates from doing irreversible damage before they could even send a signal. Or worse, he might unwittingly give them the tools to achieve it. Lariel scoffed softly.
Rescuing another god? Charming.
Brock ignored her, meeting Fleek's gaze, then Bjorngir's. The suspicion hadn't vanished, not entirely, but Bjorngir's intel felt vital. His desperation earlier, too raw to be faked. And his actions against the guards spoke louder than words. For now, they needed him. They needed everyone. He made the call, the burden of leadership settling more firmly onto his shoulders. We don't have time for grudges, Brock stated, his voice firm, cutting through the tension. Fekkerden has information, maybe codes, that could stop them or help them destroy this place. He's our priority now. Fleek, find the safest, fastest route to Power Junction Gamma 7. It turned to Lariel. We need your eyes. Scout ahead. Keep us clear. Finally, he looked at Bjorngir. Watch our backs. Let us know if you hear anything, or see anything Gord-specific. He took a steadying breath. Let's move. The spire's hidden arteries were a disorienting maze. One moment they were squeezing through dusty ventilation shafts where the air tasted stale and metallic. The next, they emerged into the cavernous maintenance corridors where their footsteps echoed ominously, amplifying the unnerving silence between distant, muffled thuds that might have been explosions or collapsing structures. Emergency lights flickered inconsistently, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eyes, making stationary pipes seem to writhe and inert machinery appear poised to strike. Brock kept the schematic navigator held high, its cool blue light a small beacon against the oppressive gloom. The device felt impossibly heavy, not just in physical weight, but with the burden of knowledge it contained. The spire's secrets laid bare, and the flashing red dots representing thousands of hostile invaders crawling through its veins. He led them onward, his eyes constantly scanning the holographic display, cross-referencing the twisting paths with the real-world environment. Sharp drop ahead, he warned, his voice low. Ladder access. Looks rusted. Bjorngir, test it first. The massive gourd moved forward without comment, gripped the corroded metal rung set into the grimy wall. He gave a tentative pull, then a stronger one, the metal groaning in protest, but holding firm. Stable enough, he rumbled, beginning the descent into the deeper darkness below. They moved through the sections Brock didn't even know existed. Vast, silent chambers filled with hulking, dormant industrial machinery coated in years of dust, remnants of some forgotten manufacturing process. Automated factory lines stood frozen mid-cycle, robotic arms poised over unseen components. The scale was immense, humbling, and deeply creepy, like walking through the corpse of a sleeping giant. The silence in these areas was profound, broken only by the drip of unseen water or the scuttling of some small, unseen thing disturbed by their passage. That was a stark contrast to the pristine, humming efficiency of the Academy proper, a hidden layer of utilitarian grit beneath the gleaming facade. Their progress was slow, dictated by caution and the ever-present threat markers on the schematic. Several times Brock had to call a halt,
pressing them back into alcoves or behind towering banks of capacitors as red dots swept through nearby corridors. They relied on Bjorngeir's keen hearing, honed by gourd senses and G-ball instincts. Movement, Bjorngeir muttered once. Head tilted, his spine ridges barely moving.
Soft clicks. World 3 comms units. Close. North corridor. Parallel to this one. Moving away.
Brock checked the schematic. Confirmed. Patrol heading towards Sector Beta. We cut south here. We used the old coolant tunnels. These tunnels were damp and cold. Water pooling onto the floor. The air thick with the smell of mildew and stagnant chemicals. It was claustrophobic, forcing even Brock to stoop, while Bjorngeir had to practically crawl in places. But the schematic showed them clear of pirate activity. A necessary detour. It was in one of these cramped tunnels that Lariel proved her worth beyond mere observation. They reached a junction where the schematic showed a single pirate icon stationary just around the corner. A sentry, blocking the only viable path forward. Retreat meant backtracking significantly, losing precious time.
I will handle it,
Lariel whispered, her voice barely disturbing the damp air. Before Brock could argue, she seemed to dissolve. Her form shimmered, the vibrant blue skin and orange hair blending seamlessly with the corroded metal and deep shadows of the tunnel wall. It was perfect environmental mimicry. She flowed forward, silent as drifting smoke. Brock held his breath, peering around the corner just enough to see. The gourd sentry stood alert, rifle held ready, his helmeted head scanning methodically. Lariel emerged from the shadows directly behind him, like a phantom coalescing from the gloom. There was no wasted motion, no sound. A flicker of movement, a glint of the chef's knife and the faint light reflecting off wet surfaces. A soft, choked gasp from the gourd, his rifle clattering harmlessly to the floor as he slumped forward. Lariel already melting back into the shadows. She reappeared beside them a moment later, wiping the knife clean on a discarded rag. Okay, definitely not just a prep queen. Path is clear, she stated, her tone coolly efficient, betraying nothing of the lethality she had just displayed. Brock found himself looking at her with a new, unsettling respect. She wasn't just a socialite playing dress-up. There was something dangerously competent beneath that high-fashion exterior. Further on, the path was blocked by a heavy durasteel bulkhead, sparks occasionally spitting from its damaged control panel. The schematic indicated it sealed off access to a critical service elevator shaft they needed to bypass a heavily guarded stairwell. Red dots were converging on their position from a lower level. Krefix's forces were actively searching, tightening the net. Locked down tight, Brock muttered, studying the schematic's internal diagnostics. Pirate override. Standard encryption. Allow me, Fleek said, pushing his glasses up his snout. He knelt by the sparkling panel, plugging his scavenged device into an auxiliary port Brock hadn't even noticed. He muttered under his breath as he worked on the machinery. Archaic security protocol. Brute forcing the handshake, isolating the command relay. They routed the lockdown through a secondary network. Sloppy. Sparks showered from the panel as Fleek worked. Almost. Need to physically override the magnetic lock actuator. Bjorngeir, this panel here. He pointed to a heavy plate near the door hinge. Pry it open. Just enough for me to reach the primary coil. Bjorngeir wedged his fingers into the seam, muscles straining. With a screech of protesting metal, the panel bent outwards a few crucial inches. Fleek reached in a slender tool from his kit, manipulating something inside. Got it! Rerouting power signature. Now! With a heavy clunk and a hiss of hydraulics, the bulkhead slid open. Go, go! Brock urged, pushing Lariel through. As Bjorngeir and Brock scrambled after her, Fleek yanked his device free, then slammed his fist onto an emergency shutoff nearby. More sparks erupted, and the bulkhead ground halfway shut behind them with a deafening screech, jamming itself partially open but effectively blocking immediate pursuit. That won't hold them long, Fleek panted, adjusting his glasses. But it might buy us a few minutes. Brock nodded, clapping him on the shoulder. Good work, Fleek, both of you. He glanced back at the jammed door and then checked the schematic again. Elevator shaft access is just ahead. Let's keep moving. They traversed another section. This one a high catwalk suspended above a vast, multi-leveled space Brock recognized dimly as one of the Academy's central common areas, or perhaps a large lecture amphitheater, now dark save for the weak glow of the emergency signs far below. Reinforced transparasteel windows lined the walkway, offering a view of the sealed area below, and what they saw made Brock's blood run cold. Down on the main floor, maybe 5 or 6 students, a mix of species Brock didn't recognize immediately, looking terrified and young, and were huddled together near a sealed exit. 3 whale tree pirates were systematically working on the door controls with heavy plasma cutters, sparks showering the area. A 4th pirate stood back, rifle trained on the students, occasionally shouting threats that Brock couldn't quite make out through the thick windows, but whose intent was terrifyingly clear. The students flinched at every shout, clinging to each other. Brock stopped dead, his hand tightening on the navigator. They were exposed up here, but the pirates below were focused on their victims. Fleek made a soft distress sound, his ears flattening against his skull.
The access panel near the main projector booth. If we could get down there.
Lariel watched the scene below with detached calculation, but said nothing, waiting for Brock's lead. Bjorngir stared down, his massive fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. Brock saw a flicker of something in the Gord's eyes. Empathy? Or perhaps just the grim recognition of helpless victims facing brutal fanatics, echoing his own mother's presumed plight. Brock's mind raced. Intervene? They could probably take out those 4 pirates, ambush them from right above, use the element of surprise, but the plasma cutter noise, the potential firefight, they would echo through this whole sector. It would bring dozens more pirates running. It would cost them precious time, minutes they desperately needed to reach Feckerden before Grolnak got whatever codes he was after. Feckerden, who might hold the key to saving the entire spire from suffocation. He looked at the terrified students below. He looked at the schematic, the flashing red dots representing the larger threat, the timer he felt ticking down. Leadership, he was learning, sometimes meant making the decision that felt utterly wrong for the sake of a potentially greater good. It tasted like ash in his mouth. We can't. Fleek's ears drooped further. Lariel gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod, her expression unchanging, cold pragmatism winning out. Bjorngir let out a slow, heavy breath, like air escaping a punctured pressure tank, and punched the transparasteel window softly, a gesture of impotent fury. Brock tore his eyes away from the scene below, forcing himself to turn and move forward along the catwalk. Feckerden first, he repeated, the words feeling hollow. Move. The weight of that decision settled heavily on his shoulders. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. You can't save everyone, he argued weakly. Sacrifices. God damn it, this feels wrong. But the whole spire is at risk if we try to be heroes. Feckerden's the key. He hoped to God he was right. They pressed on, the mood heavier now, the silence thicker. The brief flashes of successful teamwork felt muted by the stark reminder of their limitations and the brutal realities of the invasion. They descended further into the spire's depths, following the twisting routes dictated by the schematic and Brock's increasingly grim determination. The environment began to change again. The air grew warmer, filled with the low, resonant hum of massive power conduits. The metallic tang was replaced by the sharp scent of ozone, the distinct smell of things not meant to burn, burning all the same. Distant sounds weren't just booms anymore, but the deep, rhythmic thrum of heavy machinery operating under immense strain. We're close, Brock announced, his voice tight. He pointed to the schematic, the area around the power junction Gamma 7 glowing ominously. Pirate concentration is spiking. Multiple patrols converging on the control room access points. Looks like Grolnak's getting impatient. They found cover behind a bank of humming, vibrating heat exchangers, the warmth radiating from them a pleasantly stark contrast to the cold tunnels they'd left behind. Brock peered cautiously around the edge. The corridor ahead lay directly towards the main control room entrance, a heavy blast door flanked by humming capacitor banks. Even from here, he could see the flicker of energy shields shimmering intermittently across the doorway and the distinct shape of armored guards patrolling nearby. The reconnaissance phase was definitely over. The sounds of the spire's beating heart, or perhaps its struggling one, surrounded them. Thackerton was just a couple feet away, held captive at the center of a hornet's nest, and the time for stealth and evasion was rapidly running out.
Main door suicide,
Brock whispered, tracing a finger across the holographic display.
Sensor grid, energy shield, at least 2 guards visible, probably more inside.
Lariel, having done a swift, shadowy reconnaissance closer to the control room entrance, added her assessment, her voice a low murmur.
Confirmed. 2 heavy guards outside the main door. I glimpsed inside through a viewport. At least 4 more, plus 1 significantly larger giving orders. The energy shield cycles, but is irregular. There's ventilation shaft access, high on the west wall, shielded from the main corridor's line of sight. Minimal external security focus there.
Brock pinpointed it on the schematic. It leads almost directly above the primary console bank. Thackerton's signal is originating from near there. He looked at Fleek. Can you give us cover? Jamming, diversion, anything? Fleek nodded, already plugging his scavenge device into a thick data conduit snaking along the floor.
I can create a localized sensor blackout and communication jamming bubble. Short range, maybe 30 seconds max duration. I can also try overloading a non-critical capacitor nearby. Should create a loud discharge. Draw their attention for a moment.
Good. Do all that. Brock turned to the others. Plan is simple. Fleek jams and creates a diversion. Lariel, you take out the guards covering the vent access. Silently. Buengir, you're with me. We go in through the vent. Hit the guards inside hard and fast. Thermal shock tactic. Aim for the suit coolant lines. Follow up immediately. We need to overwhelm them before they know what hit them. Buengir gave a curt nod, his eyes fixed on the schematic of the control room interior Brock projected. Lariel simply touched the hilt of her knife, a silent affirmation.
All right.
Brock took a breath, the weight of the impending violence settling in his gut.
Fleek, on your signal.
Lariel, move into position.
Let's do this.
Lariel melted into the shadows, flowing towards the west wall where the vent access was located. Brock and Buengir tensed, knives ready, eyes locked on the corridor leading to the control room.
Preparing capacitor overload,
Fleek muttered.
Jamming field initiated. Now.
A blinding flash erupted down the corridor near the main control room door, accompanied by a deafening crack boom as the capacitor bank deliberately overloaded, showering the area with harmless but dramatic sparks. Simultaneously, the sensor indicators on Brock's schematic around the control room flickered and died. The jamming field was active. The 2 guards outside the main door instinctively spun towards the explosion, weapons raised, momentarily distracted. In that instant, Lariel struck. Moving from the blind spot near the west wall, she was a blur of motion. 2 swift, precise attacks. One guard collapsed with a knife embedded in the vulnerable joint beneath his helmet. The other crumpled silently as Lariel applied some kind of disabling nerve strike to his neck. It was over before the echoes of the capacitor blast faded. From the shadows near the high vent, Lariel gave a quick, almost invisible thumbs up.
Go,
Brock hissed. He scrambled up the conduits lining the wall, reaching the vent cover. It was heavy, bolted shut. Buengir was right behind him, leveraging his massive strength to wrench the bolts free with a groan of protesting metal. Brock pulled the cover open and slipped inside, dropping lightly onto the grating below within the brightly lit control room. He landed in a crouch, knife held low, scanning rapidly. The room was a hive of activity. Humming consoles, flashing displays, thick power cables snaking across the floor. 4 gored pirates, startled by the capacitor blast outside and the sudden intrusion, were turning towards the vent, raising their heavy energy rifles. Coach Thackerton was visible further back, slumped in a chair near the large console bank, guarded by the larger, heavily armored guard Lariel had spotted. Grolnak. Buengir landed beside Brock with a heavy thud that shook the grating. There was no time for finesse.
Take right!
Brock yelled, darting left.
Got it!
Buengir roared, charging right. Brock moved fast, low to the ground, using the consoles as intermittent cover. His target, a standard Weldtree trooper, tracked him, firing a burst of energy that sizzled past Brock's ear and scorched the console behind him.
Brock slid the last few feet, the knife flashing out, slicing cleanly through the braided coolant line running along the pirate's outer thigh armor. A sharp hiss escaped the suit, followed instantly by a roar of pain and surprise from the gourd inside, as the sudden warmth hit his scales through the breach. He staggered, momentarily disoriented by the thermal shock, dropping his rifle's aim. Simultaneously, Bjorngir met his own target head-on. The pirate fired, but Bjorngir took his energy bolt square on the shoulder plating, barely slowing as he smashed his fist into the side of the pirate's helmet, the impact echoing like a hammer blow. Before the gourd could recover, Bjorngir grabbed the exposed coolant line near the neck seal and ripped it free with brute force. The pirate collapsed, convulsing uncontrollably from the severe thermal shock. The remaining two guards reacted, concentrating their fire. Energy bolts crisscrossed the room, ricocheting off consoles, filling the air with the smell of burning circuits. Brock dove behind a sturdy server bank, the metal screaming as shots impacted nearby. Bjorngir used a massive support pillar as cover, returning fire with a discarded pirate rifle he'd scooped up. His shots surprisingly accurate despite the weapon's unfamiliarity. One of the remaining pirates wore slightly different armor, bulkier, possibly reinforced. He advanced steadily, firing methodical bursts towards Bjorngir's pillar. Brock saw his chance. While the guard was focused on Bjorngir, Brock burst from cover, sprinting across the open floor. The guard turned, surprised, swinging his rifle around. Brock slid, bringing his knife up in a desperate slash towards the guard's weapon arm. The blade skittered off the reinforced plating. Damn it! Before the pirate could fire, Bjorngir roared and charged up from behind his pillar, tackling the armored guard low, driving him back against a humming console bank with bone-jarring force. The pirate struggled, trying to bring his rifle to bear, but Bjorngir pinned him, grappling fiercely. Hansen, no! The joint! Brock scrambled up, spotting the vulnerability Bjorngir had created. The exposed underarm joint where the reinforced plating didn't quite meet. He plunged the knife in deep, hitting the coolant line beneath. The pirate convulsed violently, his grip loosening as the thermal shock hit him hard. Bjorngir silenced him with a final, brutal blow. The last guard hesitated, momentarily overwhelmed, glancing back towards his commander. That hesitation was fatal. Lariel, having slipped into the room unnoticed during the firefight, emerged from the shadows behind him like a vengeful spirit. Her knife flashed once across his throat, and he dropped without a sound. Silence fell, broken only by the hum of the machinery, the crackle of damaged consoles, and the ragged breathing of Brock and Bjorngir. 4 pirates down. Adrenaline pounded in Brock's ears. He pushed himself up, knife still ready, turning towards the back of the room. Sub-Commander Grolnak stepped fully into view, shoving Coach Fackerden roughly in front of him as a shield. Grolnak was even larger up close, his armor scarred and customized, radiating menace. He held a wicked-looking energy pistol pressed firmly against Fackerden's temple. The coach looked rough. His arm hung limp at his side, and blood matted the spines near a nasty gash on his head, but his eyes were alert, narrowed with defiance and pain. Grolnak's eyes, burning with malice, fixed on Bjorngir. He sneered a low, guttural sound.
Turkson's whelp. So the soft scale found some fangs after all.
His gaze flickered with contemptuous recognition.
I served with your father on the Iron Claw, boy. He was a true guard. He understood strength, power, and purging the weakness. Kerfix sees your potential, buried under this Orient filth. But you still shame your bloodline, hiding behind a human.
His attention turned to Fackerden, pistol pressing harder.
And you, old-timer, still teaching pups how to chase balls instead of fighting. Pathetic! Kerfix hasn't forgotten your strategic retreats during the Orion campaign. Cowardice then, cowardice now. He sends his regards, right before I take those command codes from your dying mind. Choke and die, Grolnak.
Fackerden spat, wincing as Grolnak jabbed the pistol harder.
You know nothing of true strength, only slaughter.
Grolnak laughed, harsh, grating sound.
Strength is slaughter, old fool. Survival! Something your precious academy refuses to teach.
He raised his pistol slightly, preparing to interrogate or execute.
Kronak!
Feckerden suddenly barked, ignoring the pistol at his head. His coach's voice cutting through the tension.
Your ridge plating. Always favored your right side in spotting drills since you took a piece of shrapnel over Teresh.
Grolnak flinched, involuntarily at the specific and unexpected tactical call-out. In that microsecond of distraction, Brock moved. He hurled his borrowed knife not at Grolnak, but at a control panel beside him. Aiming for a large, exposed emergency release button Feckerden had subtly indicated with the flicker of his eyes. The knife struck true, the button depressed with a loud clack. Sparks erupted from the ceiling directly above Grolnak as an emergency fire suppression nozzle discharged. A thick, viscous, rapidly cooling gel designed to smother electrical fires. Grolnak roared in surprise and anger as the cold, sticky substance rained down on him, partially obscuring his vision and making his footing treacherous. He shoved Feckerden away instinctively to clear his line of sight. Bjorngir seized the opening Feckerden and Brock had created. With a bellowing war cry, he charged, ignoring the sticky gel splashing around him. He slammed into Grolnak, the impact echoing through the control room. Grolnak, hampered by the goo and Bjorngir's sheer fury, struggled to bring his pistol to bear. Brock scrambled forward, scooping up a heavy wrench dropped by one of the fallen pirates. Feckerden, despite his injuries, shouted again.
The primary capacitor bank behind him! Overload the conduit!
Brock saw it. A humming bank of cylinders Grolnak was staggering near as he wrestled with Bjorngir. Lariel suddenly appeared from the side, darting in low, her knife slashing deep into the back of Grolnak's knee joint, eliciting another roar of pain and making him stumble farther. Brock didn't hesitate. He grabbed and swung the heavy wrench with all his might, smashing it into the thick, glowing power conduit feeding the capacitor bank Feckerden had indicated. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. With a blinding flash and a sound like tearing metal, the conduit ruptured. Raw energy arced violently, striking the capacitor bank. Consoles exploded nearby, showering the area in sparks and shrapnel. Grolnak screamed as stray energy tendrils licked across his armor, overloading its systems. He convulsed, pistol firing wildly into the ceiling before clattering from his grasp. Bjorngir, shielded somewhat by Grolnak's bulk, delivered a final, brutal punch that sent the incapacitated sub-commander crashing heavily to the floor amidst the sparking debris. His armor smoking, the immediate threat was neutralized. Brock rushed to Feckerden, quickly cutting his remaining restraints with the knife he retrieved. The coach slumped forward, gripping his injured arm, breathing heavily but conscious.
Took you long enough, Hansen.
Feckerden grunted, managing a grimace that might have been a smile.
I thought I'd have to fight him myself.
But the victory was short-lived. The system overload had triggered every alarm in the sector. Klaxons blared deafeningly. Emergency lights flashed strobing red. And from the approach corridors, the heavy, rhythmic thudding of dozens of armored boots grew rapidly louder. Reinforcements were converging, sealing off their escape. Brock checked the schematic. A flood of approaching red dots confirmed it. They were trapped.
Main corridors are blocked!
He yelled over the din, pointing at the screen where converging red dots formed solid barriers.
They're boxing us in!
Fleek, who had cautiously entered the control room after the main firefight, was already scanning the area with his scavenged device, his ears flat against his skull from the noise.
Secondary access tunnels are also compromised. Pirate forces rerouted. Structural damage reported in Sector Gamma 8 blocking that route.
Really could do with another miracle right about now, Fleek.
Brock urged, his voice tight with desperation. Feckerden, leaning heavily against a console, grimacing with pain, pointed a shaky finger towards a dark, unassuming section of the far wall, partially obscured by hanging cables.
There,
He grunted.
cargo lift delta. Decommissioned decades ago. Shaft runs straight down, maybe 20 floors.
Brock zoomed in on that area of the schematic. A thin, vertical line appeared, marked with cautionary icons. Cargo lift delta, decommissioned, structural integrity warning. It's marked unstable, Coach.
Everything is unstable right now, Hansen.
Feckerden retorted.
It might collapse, yes, but the pirates won't expect it. They probably don't even know it exists. It is our only shot.
Brock made the split-second decision. Okay, Fleek, can you get the access door open? Lariel, Bjorngir, cover our rear. Buy us some time.
Lariel nodded sharply, melting back towards the main entrance corridor, knife flashing as she prepared to delay the inevitable. Bjorngir hefted the heavy pirate rifle he still carried, planting his feet near the sparking bulkhead Fleek had previously jammed, ready to meet the first wave. Fleek scrambled toward the wall Feckard had indicated, his device already interfacing with the grimy, archaic-looking panel nearby.
It's an old hydraulic system. Manual override required. Bypassing safety interlocks.
Heavy pounding began outside the control room's main blast door, accompanied by the hiss of plasma torches. They were cutting through.
Fleek, faster!
Brock yelled, helping Feckard in towards the cargo lift access point.
Almost there!
Fleek manipulated a large, rusted lever beside the panel. With a piercing screech of tortured metal and a groan of ancient hydraulics, a section of the wall slid sideways, revealing a dark, gaping maw. The entrance to the cargo lift delta shaft. A gust of stale, cold air billowed out.
Go, go!
Brock shouted, urging Feckard in toward the opening. The main blast door buckled inward with a deafening crash, revealing a phalanx of Whale-Tree pirates surging into the room, weapons blazing. Bjorngir roared, opening fire with the rifle, cutting down the first few attackers, but immediately drawing intense return fire that forced him back towards the lift shaft entrance. Lariel moved like a whirlwind near the breached doorway. She wasn't trying to hold the line, but to disrupt and delay. Knives flew out with uncanny accuracy, finding gaps in armor, causing pirates to stumble, to hesitate. She used the chaos, the sparking debris, the slippery coolant gel on the floor to her advantage, a fleeting, deadly presence that bought them precious seconds. Brock helped the injured Feckardin into the dark shaft. Thick emergency cables hung down into the abyss, coated in dust and grime.
Grab a cable, rappel down!
Brock instructed, shoving a cable into Feckardin's good hand. He grabbed one himself, looping it around his arm. Bjorngir laid down a final burst of covering fire, then turned and launched himself into the shaft, grabbing a thick cable bundle. Lariel, seeing them descending, threw one last knife, catching a pirate in the throat, then sprinted and leapt into the shaft just as energy bolts scorched the wall where she had been. Fleek was the last one up the edge. As pirates charged towards him, weapons firing, he frantically aimed a scavenge device at the lift's ancient door mechanism, pouring power into it. Brock watched from below as sparks erupted violently from the mechanism above. With a deafening groan and a shriek of tearing metal, the heavy access door slammed partially shut, then buckled inward and collapsed. Debris raining down into the shaft, effectively sealing the entrance amidst a shower of sparks and smoke. Fleek leaped just before it fully collapsed, grabbing onto a cable and sliding rapidly downwards. Their descent was perilous. The shaft was pitch black beyond the faint light Brock cast upwards from the navigator. Dust choked the air. The cables were slippery with grime. They half slid, half repelled, using damaged structural beams and protruding conduits as precarious footholds, dropping rapidly through the dark guts of the spire. Brock kept the navigator active, confirming their downward progress, praying the ancient shaft wouldn't choose this moment to fully collapse. 20 floors felt like an eternity. Finally, Brock's feet hit solid ground with a jarring impact. They had reached the bottom. They shone the navigator's light around. They were in a vast, dark space, completely different from the industrial levels above. The air was thick, humid, and carried a strange, earthy, faintly floral scent. Strange silhouettes loomed in the darkness. Tall, leafy shapes. Thick vines hanging like pythons from unseen ceilings. Water dripped steadily somewhere nearby. The others landed around him, coughing from the dust, bruised but alive. Feckardin leaned heavily against one of the walls of tangled vines, clutching his injured arm. Bjorngir scanned the darkness, rifle held ready. Lariel landed lightly, immediately assessing their surroundings. Fleek stumbled slightly on the landing, adjusting his glasses. His eyes widened slightly as he took in the scene revealed by Brock's light. Tangled masses of bizarre alien flora filled the space. Bioluminescent fungi cast faint, eerie glows, and broad leaves unfurled like alien umbrellas. Thick roots snaked across the floor, and looked like a jungle had somehow taken root deep within the metallic heart of the spire.
I know this place,
Fleek breathed, a note of awe mixed with caution in his voice.
Sector 7G Xenobotany Labs, decommissioned several years ago. after the creeping vine incident.
He moved towards a wall panel half swallowed by thick, pulsating vines, brushing them aside to reveal a dusty, old-style terminal screen. Plugging his device in, he bypassed the ancient security protocols with contemptuous ease,
Rerouting local power and activating primary blast doors.
with a low rumble that seemed to shake the very floor. Massive, vine-covered blast doors ground shut nearby, sealing the entrance tunnel they'd emerged from. Another set sealed the corresponding exit farther into the lab complex. For the first time since the attack began, they were relatively secure, sealed off from the chaos above, hidden within a forgotten, overgrown corner of the spire. The immediate threat abated, the adrenaline began to ebb, leaving exhaustion and the dull ache of injuries in its wake. Brock slumped against a wall. He pulled out the medkit he'd grabbed from the G-Ball locker room, thankfully restocked, and moved towards Feckerden.
Let me see that arm, Coach.
He said, his voice rough. Feckerden grunted, but allowed Brock to carefully cut away the torn fabric of his uniform and examine the wound. It wasn't bleeding profusely, but looked deep, likely needing proper medical attention. The head wound was similarly nasty. Brock cleaned and bandaged both as best he could with limited supplies. L'Ariel, surprisingly, produced a small, high-tech antiseptic spray from a pouch on her belt, likely part of her extensive cosmetic kit, repurposed and applied it efficiently. Bjorngir stood guard near the sealed door, his massive form a reassuring presence, listening intently to the silence beyond. Fleet continued working at the terminal, securing their temporary sanctuary.
Network connection here is isolated,
He reported.
Pirates' intrusion hasn't reached this far down. We should be safe for a while.
A fragile quiet settled over the group. The only sounds their breathing, the steady drip of water, and the faint, almost imperceptible rustling of the alien plants surrounding them. Feckerden broke the silence, his voice strained but firm, his eyes hard with grim realization.
Grumak,
He began, wincing as he shifted position.
the codes they wanted, the biometrics, they weren't just for controlling power grids or defenses.
He looked directly at Brock, then Fleek.
They needed my command authorization and biometrics to override the triple redundant failsafes on the Central Spire's primary atmospheric recycler and the filtration controls. Sector Alpha 0. Main Environmental Command.
Fleek froze at the terminal, slowly turning around, his expression aghast.
The recycler? Coach, disabling that would be devastating. The atmospheric toxicity would reach levels lethal for most species within 15 minutes at best.
Feckerden nodded grimly, the movement pulling at his bandages.
Exactly. 15 minutes of breathable air left for the entire Spire. They weren't trying to control the Spire, Hansen. They weren't trying to cause chaos or capture you.
His voice dropped, heavy with horror.
They were trying to suffocate it, kill everyone inside, force a panicked, uncontrolled evacuation right into the hands of their fleet waiting outside, or just exterminate thousands. Gronak needed my overrides because the system is designed to resist anything less than direct, authorized command, especially during a lockdown.
The revelation hit everyone. Suffocation. Thousands of students, faculties, staff, trapped, gasping for air. It was monstrous. Far beyond simple piracy or hostage-taking. This was genocide on a spire-wide scale. Bjorngir let out a low, guttural growl, slamming his fist against the blast door.
Corfix, fanatic, butcher.
A thought suddenly clicked into place in his mind.
The whale seat, the location they gave me, near the Q-Com array on floor 100. It makes sense now. Sabotage communications, prevent any distress signal just as the atmosphere begins to fail. Maximum terror, maximum casualties.
Fleek frantically accessed the schematic again,
wirelessly linking Brock's navigator to the ancient terminal.
He's right. Pirate forces are consolidating almost entirely on floor 100 now, around the Dean's office suite.
He pointed at the display, showing a dense, angry red swarm.
The suite contains direct access to the Q-com array, and likely houses the ultimate secondary command interfaces for major Spire systems, including atmospheric control, meant for use only if primary command nodes like Gamma-7 are compromised.
The horrifying picture snapped into focus for all of them. The pirates weren't just trying to break into the Dean's office for the Dean himself, or even Brock if they thought he was there. They were trying to secure the Spire's communication nexus and its final environmental kill switch. The Oubliette was the last physical barrier preventing Kurfix from unleashing atmospheric death upon tens of thousands of unsuspecting souls. Brock stared at the schematic, at the overwhelming concentration of red around the Dean's position. The dot representing the Dean was still active, but flickering slightly, indicating what? Injury? A failing signal? It was holding them off somehow, buying time. How much time? As if summoned by their dread, the ancient emergency lights in the xenobotany lab flickered violently, casting strobe-like shadows across their horrified faces. A harsh, crackling sound emanated from a dusty speaker grill set high on the wall, startling them all. Then, Kurfix Gradagast's voice, amplified, distorted, dripping with venomous triumph, boomed into the sealed lab, overriding the local systems.
Dean Nuran Oubliette.
The voice scraped like rusted metal.
Your time is up. Give me the human Brock Hansen now.
Kurfix's voice dropped, becoming almost a predatory snarl.
Or the Spire's heart dies with you.
The final, chilling words were instantly punctuated by a sound that made Brock's blood freeze. The distinct, terrifying discharge of heavy energy weaponry firing at close range. Not distant booms, but powerful, rapid crack, crack, crack sounds, followed immediately by the sharp, shattering screech of reinforced plastisteel or transparasteel giving way under assault. The sounds echoed hideously through the speaker, painting a vivid picture of the final, desperate moments outside the Dean's office. Then, abruptly, silence. Absolute, profound silence from the speaker, leaving them again with only the drip of water and the frantic hammering of Brock's own heart in the eerie, overgrown lab.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode, and if you like the Sunspire series, there is more of it right here. Is this thing, are we still recording?